So thank you very much for your 4 very, very interesting presentations. So we have an half an hour. I open the discussion between you and the speakers, and perhaps also between the speakers each other, if they wish. Okay, and you can speak, of course, in French or in English. The first question is always the most difficult. I have a question. Frédéric. But perhaps I can... let's go.
If you want to add...
No.
Well, thank you for all these very interesting and delightful presentations. I was just wondering, can we talk about trust and ignore distrust? Aren't these two concepts that, in one way or the other, belong together? They're not each other's opposites, but they do. There was a growing emergence also in sociological studies that they come together. And we also have l'état de droit démocratique, rule of law and democracy. One has an organized, a system of organized trust, and one has a system of organized distrust. And we also have, we're talking now about trust in political theory and in constitutional law, as if we just establish some institutions and then there is trust, which isn't there, because if we look at numbers, then we see that in Europe, in most countries, less than the majority, less than half trusts parliament, which is a problem, and they trust courts more. So my question is, why don't we also talk about distrust, and why don't we also talk about courts, and then especially if you talk about Belgium, about constitutional courts?
Comment fait-on? Est-ce qu'on globalise les...
So should we take all the questions together? Okay, so this is what is proposed. We're going to take all the questions together, or 3 or 4 questions together, and then the speakers will answer them.
Oui, bonjour, je vais.
Good afternoon. I will speak French this way. There's for both Philippe Lambrecht from Louvain. I have a question that is similar to this latest question. That is the way the Constitution also deals with the judiciary powers, and I'm thinking especially of the High Court, which was introduced for a question of distrust at some point. So this is an important question. Can we talk about trust without at the same time having a judicial power that you can trust? And maybe there's another thing, then that's the current difficulty we have now with a government that does not comply with the court's rulings. This is what I wanted to add.
It's a really interesting range of presentations. I wanted to try to link maybe something the two of you said at the end to the efforts to make a more sort of conceptually precise account of trust. And from what I understand, take your example about the babysitting, there's a question of capacity involved in trust as well that wasn't highlighted, I don't think, as much. You have to, the attitude or the belief or whatever, it has to involve also the aspect that somebody must actually be capable of babysitting. And if the capacity issue comes to the front, I think that's what you were saying at the end. It'd be nice to hear more about that, because that brings you back to sort of the more material context, and whether we'd be wrong to focus too much just on attitudes and beliefs and affect, and think also more, or think together that part of the question together with simply very simple questions of delivery of public services, institutional capacity, that sort of thing.
Éventuellement encore une question.
Maybe one more question? If not, I have a question myself, if I may. And I will ask it in French. So what is the relationship between political trust, the vertical trust, in institutions or politicians, and then I think that it happened quite frequently in our discussions, the horizontal trust between individuals, between groups, between categories. There's the example of parents and the babysitter. This is maybe I don't have an example in mind, maybe because I'm 61, but this is quite a relevant example. But my question is, the trust, social horizontal trust, is it possible without having this vertical trust? And I say no. If there is no power and the minimum of trust of those governed into the government, then the result is that there is a war, a conflict. But we could ask the opposite question also. Isn't there trust, or is political trust possible without a minimum of glue? I think Mr. Loughlin called it glue between the citizens themselves, not just vertically but also horizontally. So we know that the far right wins in regions where there are no public services, no stores, where neighbors don't talk to one another, so people don't trust one another. So maybe that's a question, a broad question, broadening further the issue. But I think this was some kind of latent questions in all of your presentations. There's a question in the back, but wait, because we need the mic because we are recording this. Sorry. To add on to your question, I think that it would be interesting also to think of the trust relationship in the other way. Representatives have also lost trust in the population, and tomorrow I'm going to deliver a speech on transparency, for example, in the access to administrative documents. When citizens ask to have access to those documents, the answer of the government is no, you cannot have access. And then there is a favorable decision of the 𝐶ADA, and an administrative court says yes, you can have access to this, but the government doesn't want to pass on this information, probably because there's a lack of trust, a loss of trust in the population, because they fear that this information will be reused by the media, the citizen, in a conflictual way. So in fact, there is a double verticality. And as I said about transparency, there's a bottom-up and top-down verticality between the government and the citizens. Okay, I think that we have enough questions for now. I don't know who amongst the speakers would like to start.
I am happy to try and address all 6 questions, and I have asked you for your patience, but I will be brief. First, yes, I don't think we can talk about trust without the correlative of distrust. And the problem I have, and unfortunately Raquel has just left the room, the problem I have with the type of presentation that Raquel gives, where she says, in a healthy constitutional democracy based on the rule of law, what is the role of trust? Well, the answer's already in the presuppositions of the question, because you've already built in a healthy constitutional democracy with respect for rights and the rule. Well, obviously, that generates trust, but it's not the world we live in, as I understand it. So that's all I would say about trust and distrust. But elaborating on that, I would say the role model, the example we might point to, is the Weimar Republic. I mean, in 1919, the Germans, having suffered tremendous defeat in the First World War, draft this wonderful social democratic constitution. But the problem is the unsettled character of the society at the time, the faction between the fascists on the right and the communists and the socialists on the left, could not build a consensus around the authority of that constitution. So we can draft all sorts of fancy constitutions that build in structures of control and accountability, but if the conditions in society are such that that it's not conducive, that you can't build the authority of a constitution, and then we haven't got the base point. Actually, this is a question I have of the other members of the panel, I suppose, implicitly. One of the reasons I said I hadn't really examined the concept of trust in any detail when I opened my presentation, and I realized in reflecting on it that one of the reasons is that I would always use the word authority rather than trust. And I don't understand, the more I think about it, what is the difference between authority and trust. And I distrust trust because it too readily gets us into morality and moral sense of legitimacy, whereas a political authority understood politically is, I think, a more robust notion for addressing these political questions. Fourth point, the court. Again, continuing the German example. I see Christoph Möllers hasn't yet arrived, so I can talk about the German example. After the collapse of the Nazi regime and the attempt to rebuild a constitution in post-war Germany, the first thing they had to do was invent a constitutional court, a court that was not part of the normal civil system, because there was, not amongst the people, but rather amongst the powers, the Allied powers, there was distrust in the German judiciary. So we invented a new court, staffed with new type of personnel, to try to build trust, to try to build confidence that the values implicit in the basic law would be properly respected and enforced by a special court. And of course, what we see in the post-war period across the world, the growth of these special constitutional courts, deliberately intended to break with the traditional techniques of legal analysis, legal dogmatic legal interpretation, to bring about these changes. Finally, I think it's no, fine. It's not fine. It's penultimate. There's a question on the vertical and the horizontal relation. Well, I tried to deal with, and I didn't mention it in the presentation, but I think it was on the slide. The type of study that I find very interesting here is that the work done by Robert Putnam, where he's analyzing democracies, and he compares in particular the United States and Italy, and tries to build a theory around the concept of trust, and it is very much looking at the vital role of civil society mechanisms in providing the foundation for civil trust. And I take my cue entirely on this matter from Paul Ricoeur, his excellent essay on the paradoxe politique, where he says, and when we think about a social contract, we have to remember there is the two levels of the contract. One is between the people, and one is creating a hierarchical organization. And it's that the intersection of these factors that is critical to the building of trust, or inability to build trust. And then finally, our guy at the back, thank you. Representatives have lost their trust in the people. Wonderful. I love it. It reminded me immediately of Bertolt Brecht, where he says, if if you don't like what the people say, just change the people. That's the position we've got to in across much of Europe, where the political elites are saying, we don't trust these people. So we've just got to change the people, or at least immunize them from any influence and control over our systems of government, because they just mess things up.
Je ne sais pas qui veut.
I don't know who wants to react to this, but concerning the difference between authority and power, the importance of authority. Authority is not the same thing as power. There's a conceptual resource which is Hannah Arendt and Hannah Arendt's text, What is Authority?, which demonstrates this very well, and it demonstrates that it's not just a matter of morale, but also a matter of the institutions' availability. It's not the institutions that produce authority or power.
Vous avez un micro là-bas, normalement. D'accord, d'abord, oui. Oui. OK. Céline, allez-y. On peut faire dans l'ordre. OK.
We can follow the order. Raquel first.
To say, it's up to you. No, it's okay. You speak. Yeah.
Voice.
Closer.
Okay.
Yes.
So the questions, there are so many questions, and each question raises so many interesting sub-questions. And if I could just focus on the first question a little bit about trust and distrust. I had a little note in my written remarks to make about this, but there wasn't time. It reminded me of a speech by Martin Luther King, which was published in 1964, called Why We Can't Wait. The idea that distrust, too, can be, so not just so trust is a virtue, or can be a virtue, trustworthiness is a virtue, but distrust can be apt, appropriate, required in the face of tyranny, in the face of injustice. I think that's a really, really important thought to entertain. But we should always also keep in mind, conceptually speaking, that distrusting and not trusting are different things. So, you know, there's a set of features of distrust that may not be present in the mere absence of trust. And this is important, I think, but I can't develop it here. But thank you for raising this question. Then you asked us to talk a bit about courts and constitutional courts. I think there's so much to talk about, but I think I should just leave it at that and let my colleagues speak. Thank you. Sorry.
Eileen?
Thank you. Very, very interesting questions. I mean, on the question, I think I'll be a bit more polemic than my other colleagues. On the question of trust and mistrust, I mean, as a sociologist, we always study the absence of something, right? When we say we study equality, we are actually studying inequality. When we say we study trust, we are studying mistrust and, you know, the rise and the conflict in different society. But I think, like, you know, a focus on mistrust can, you know, serve to normalize the presence of mistrust. And I strongly believe that we should view mistrust as a disease. You know, we want our societies to be healthy, and that's why we're focusing on trust and not on the mistrust. No, for me at least, like, you know, I, as a sociologist, as the, you know, the field work that I've done with these different religious groups, like, they have normalized mistrust and the presence of violence to the extent that they no longer saw it as happening. And I think we need to guard against that. We need to, you know, talk about trust as our ultimate goal and something that, you know, keeps the foundations together, because ultimately, you know, this is what we want for our societies. And I feel like, I mean, I would like, I get like Martin's point, but I also would like to see, and that also relates to the question about the example of a good example, let's say, and how should we respond to political actors. And I think there is a lot of discussion, for example, of a four-day working week in which, related to questions about productivity and growth. But I say maybe we need like 4-day working week, because on the 5th day, we need people to cultivate themselves as citizens with the right habits of the heart. There isn't, if you look into the sociological literature, the fact that, Black Lives has been there as a movement, but really took off during the pandemic, is not coincidental. Is the fact that, a lot of people were off work and they had the ability to organize and to exchange these ideas. A lot of people lament the lack of informal social control during the pandemic. Well, not if you look into reports to the police about truancy and what was happening in different neighborhoods. They were skyrocketing. So, if people are given the time, perhaps they can cultivate that. They can cultivate this idea of becoming the citizens with the right habits of the heart, of caring about others, caring about what is happening to the societies and to our moral framework. And this is where the role of politicians becomes really, really important, because they need to acknowledge that this is a necessity. So if they care about trust and how cohesive societies are, it's not just, the socioeconomic on the resources of different neighborhoods. It is also thinking about, just the daily experience of being a citizen in a different society, and what opportunity you have in your work day, in your work life, to come back and to think, oh, maybe I would volunteer with this project. I get a lot asked, why are single mothers or, different groups that are doing shift work or 10 different types of jobs, why are they not volunteering in their community? Well, the structure of their working lives does not allow them the space to become engaged. So I think there is a lot more that can be done, and we can insist of our policymakers to think about, about this. So.
Alors, je ne sais pas si on entend. Oui. I wonder whether you can hear me loud and clear, but regarding the linkage between trust and distrust, I would say that in social sciences, both things are considered not to be completely opposed, although there might be links between the two. It's not because there is suspicion and monitoring that there is a distrust. So that's what we meant, actually, at the very end. We did not have the opportunity to further develop, further elaborate on what we wanted to say, but some recent research do insist upon the fact that constitutional law does focus on some trust relationships, but it does not mean that there is no control or no monitoring at all regarding those relationships. And there is a certain type of institutionalized control and monitoring. Well, I think that regarding the next question, we thought it is about time for constitutional experts to focus on the issue of trust outside the issue of trust in the different constituencies, because constituencies have been at the very heart, of attention in the past. And we thought that there are many things which have not been taken on board, And with Matthias and Frédéric, when we drafted the project, we thought that there was that there was a kind of vacuum, in different in those different fields, and it is something quite crucial, actually, because what might maintain trust is the compliance with this with the rule of law, and it is quite something, in Belgium when we do mention it. Jaco. I would like to anticipate what I'm supposed to say, to tell you tomorrow about this notion of ability and capacity. It is a critical issue because in empirical surveys, the issue of trust is related to this political ability we might have to trust and develop trust. And another element is the deliverable at the end, public action, I would say. And for us, it does raise another point. It does raise another question. We need to look at trust in political institutions as a possibility for us to have a capacity, an ability to act from a political point of view. It has nothing to do with this notion of code of ethics, or it has nothing to do with the notion of abuse, but it has to do with our capacity to act on the genuine situation, on the real situation. And we need to refer to those elements which have to do with the constitutional approach at the European level, the fact that the state is trying to escape some fields, the Dieter Grimm approach about constitutionalization as being a problem in this particular field, as it might deter or discourage democracy. And that's where we wanted to get at the end of the day. It is a very important element. And what we need to do is to focus on those rules, which might create some constraints at the level of the political power, and mainly budget rules and the impact on stability and growth. And we have some experts in the audience about those different issues, so I will not further elaborate on that. But the conceptualization of trust does highlight other challenges, other elements at stake, and we should not get rid of that too quickly. We need to refer to the capacity, the ability, the notion of integrity. What about the horizontal approach? Very swiftly, because it's time to break for lunch. But we did not further elaborate on that, but it is a central element. Tocqueville was fully aware of that, because when he does refer to trust, he does refer to horizontal trust between citizens. And in the Republican theories, it is really the crux of the matter when we tackle the issue of trust towards policy makers or politicians. Well, we were convinced of the fact that close-off approach was the right one, because it tells us that in sophisticated and complex systems with marked and obvious conflict of interest, the emergence of horizontal trust amongst citizens is not possible anymore as it was before. Therefore, what he would advocate, indeed, is that horizontal trust is secured by the institutions. So horizontal trust is needed for political institutions, but it is also secured and built by the institutions, mainly political institutions. And if you read again the Simmel theory, that's what Close-Off did. And he does consider that it's possible for us to jump into trust, although we have some uncertainties. But anyway, we can do that with a view to promote some values focused on integrity, justice, etc. So that's what we can say about horizontal trust, and vertical trust and horizontal trust are fully intertwined. And another point of interest for Belgian people in the audience has to do with the fact that in empirical studies, it is something which is considered to be essential to political trust, because political trust might be studied from the point of view of the national or subnational identity. That's the glue. That's indeed the glue we did refer to. But how can I put it? Well, this notion of political trust has different meanings, you know, the notion of identity, national identity, this notion of ownership. And I'm a Belgian citizen, you know, so it's something which is quite important for us. And we also have something a bit more stronger, i.e. the trust we might have in ideas. But the notion of horizontal trust does highlight the importance of trust from the point of view of the national identity. Do you have anything to add? No, not really. Maybe on this notion of reciprocity of trust between the governed and the governing leaders. Just for the anecdote, I attended another seminar 2 or 3 years ago in Lille, and it was related to public law and trust in times of crisis. And one researcher did refer to this notion of reciprocity of trust, because during COVID, we had a kind of blurred system, or in France, you had a blurred system, you know, because people were supposed to give themselves the authorization to get out of their homes. And he considered that it was an evidence of the trust between the governing bodies and the governed people. But in Belgium, we do consider that participatory approaches or patterns or models are also a way to evidence this notion of trust between those who are ruling and those who are being ruled. So, at the end of the day, that's not a genuine trust or full trust, I would say. Because when we are involved as citizens, you just give an opinion, you know, you just have a say in a series of elements. But it's not something which is likely to feed in the distrust towards those ruling us. So I don't know whether I was clear or not in my approach, but I hope so. And just before lunch, I think that Martin would like to
what Nelly said, but in a sense, it's already been said with Celine's reference to Klaus Offer. Surely the objective cannot be complete trust in society. I mean, that requires a common language, a common religion, a common ethnicity, a common culture, a common sense of history, a common sense of class consciousness. This is not a world we live in. And to a so-called as an aspiration, it's really, really dangerous. We have to recognize that modern societies are built in understandable reasons for distrust of one another. We live parallel lives, which is why Michael Ignatieff, writing his really excellent book on welfare states, talks about the needs of strangers. I recognize somebody else as different. I do not want to be friends with them, but I recognize their common humanity, and I recognize a certain sense of obligation to them by paying taxes and providing common services. But the objective is not to build complete trust in these societies. Distrust is the source of liberty. The price of liberty is eternal vigilance. We ought to be in a continuous state of distrust with respect to those who are rulers of us. That's how we maintain liberty. This is, I mean, when I was originally invited, the assumption was I might start with Machiavelli. Well, this is Machiavelli. This is Machiavelli's argument. The governors want to govern, and the governed want not to be governed, and that tension is the source of our liberty. So maintaining distrust in our political institutions is a condition of maintaining liberty.
Wonderful conclusion to this debate. There is no possible trust without distrust, whether it is horizontal or vertical, I think. So that's the perfect conclusion to our debate. I would like to thank our guest speakers.
Vous-même pour les questions.